Well, hello everybody. So today we are going to be exploring Adobe After Effects and how we can use Adobe After Effects, Adobe Media Encoder, and Adobe Photoshop to create some really interesting animated GIFs. So this is going to be a sort of joint lesson for both the advanced graphic design and the advanced audiovisual class. So I'm going to be making references to lessons that I've given to both classes in the past. So if you were in my AV graphics class and I start mentioning things that we've done before with Premiere, just make sure that you realize that I'm not necessarily talking to you, but I'll be talking to the AV class. And if you are in my AV class and you hear me referencing things like vectors and Illustrator and things like that, we may have done some small things with that, but not to the extent that we've done with the graphic design class. And so just make sure that you realize that I might necessarily be addressing lessons that we've covered. So this is a really simple example of an animation I did using Adobe After Effects. You can see several things are kind of happening at once. You've got an object that's rotating, moving, changing color, and also getting smaller as it completes its little path. And then you see my name kind of pop up here. So we're going to create this, and we're going to create this. This right now is a video, and I'm going to explain how we change this video into an animated GIF a little later on. All right, so I'm just going to go ahead and close this out, and I'll show you sort of what I've got going on here. This is the Adobe After Effects. So if you don't have that open, go ahead and get that open. I'm going to go ahead and close my project right now, and let me just go ahead and kind of pull everything up to the top. Now, what I'm working with, if you have opened this up and you don't see exactly this, we can go ahead and go to Window, Workspace, and make sure you have the animation. And I'm going to go ahead and reset it to a saved layout, right? So you can kind of see what I've seen. What we're all seeing at the same thing here. And just to point a couple things out, if you are used to working with Premiere, you can see a few things that you recognize, such as this little timeline down here, a little bin for your sources, and a little preview panel. If you are not used to working with that, don't worry, I'll see if I can't walk us through this. So this will be, and if you are used to working with Photoshop, you might recognize some of the tools up here as far as text, Bezier pen, stamp, clone stamp, eraser, things like that, and obviously the hand tool and the select tool, things like that. And this works in much the same way as a lot of different Adobe products and a lot of different Adobe graphic design and video editing software, in that it works with layers, objects on different layers, and we're going to be working with different layers as we go through. So I'm going to go ahead and create, click on this button that says New Composition, and if you look through, you have several different options. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to just call this something different besides Comp 1. Every time you make a sort of Photoshop project, it's just a Photoshop document. Every time you make a Premiere project, it's a Premiere project. And every time you create something in Adobe After Effects, it's called a composition. So it automatically names everything Comp 1 or 2 or whatever. So I'm just going to go ahead and name this something like maybe, Adobe After Effects intro. And this is going to be something really brief. It's not going to be something that we're going to have an end of itself, but we're going to just sort of create this thing. Now, as far as this goes, if you don't already see HD TV 1080 2997, go ahead and click on that, so you have the same kind of, shall we say, aspect ratio and the same frame rate and various things like that, and we'll explain what all those mean, and make sure that your resolution is set to full. And I'm going to have this be 10 seconds in length. Now look right here, we see a little timeline. We've got days, we've got hours, not days, goodness, minutes, seconds, and then frames. Now, once again, we have 29.97 frames per second. So the highest value this can have is 29, and then the highest value this can have, obviously, is 59, and then 59, and then I'm not sure precisely how many hours it'll go before it kills your computer, but you get the idea. Okay, so as far as the background color goes, I'm going to choose something somewhat neutral. I'm going to choose this dark gray. If you click on your eyedropper, you can choose any color you'd like. You can just choose any of these grays that they have around here. It's always just sort of a neutral color, or if you want to go in, you can just choose something in the threes. I just choose 3, 3, 3, 3, 3. 3, and it's this sort of dark gray. That's usually what I choose for this, and then we can put a different background color at the end of it all. All right, so as soon as we do that, we have our little composition right here, and it's just brings out a little bit better because it's a little bit lighter. And let's just kind of take a look around at what we've got here, right? So this down here is our timeline, and you might see if you have your little zoom kind of toggle here, you can kind of go back and forth in that. If it's at the very end, to the very left, it's zoomed out all the way, you'll see 0 to 10 seconds here. And if it's zoomed in all the way, then you'll see individual frames. So this right here is each one of these is 1/30th of a second in length. Each frame is, and we're just going to pull that back up. I'm going to pull it all the way back here. So what we want to do is we want to create our little square. So I'm going to click on my rectangle tool at the very top there, and you can see it automatically has a fill. You can choose whatever fill you want, but we'll change that later. So we just choose whatever is the default, so long as it's different from the background, and just draw a square here. Now, you click and drag with the mouse, and if you want to make it a perfect square, you hold down Shift, and it will constrain it to have equal sides. All 4 sides will be equal. And you'll notice this little target appears. Now, for those of us who have worked with either one of these programs, you know that this is the anchor point. So if we want to adjust the anchor point to be in the center of this object, we have to choose our anchor point tool. The anchor point tool is right over here. It's the pan behind, or anchor point tool, which you can access by pressing Y on the keyboard. And as soon as you have that, you can click on your anchor point, and you can move your anchor point around here. Let me see if I can find it. Where'd it go? Right. Well, there we go. We have it there. I want to say my anchor point is here in the center, and if it's not in the center, then you want to make sure it gets in the center. Now, you can do one of two things. You can click on the anchor point, and you can just sort of drag it into the center and sort of eyeball it, or you can hold down Control, you can hold down Alt, and then find the home key above your keyboard, of your arrow keys, and you can tap on that, and that'll sort of center it right into your little object here. Okay, so with that done, let's see if we can't move it around a little bit. Now, directing our attention down here to our layers. This is our layers. This is going to be basically everything that we've got in our design here. I'm going to just look at this. We'll have one layer for a while. We'll have a second layer after a little bit here, and we see, contents, rectangle, all these different shapes and stuff like that. We don't need all this. We can just kind of collapse this little arrow here just to get rid of our little rectangle, because we're only going to have one shape in this shape layer. So by clicking over here with transform, you can see that we've got several different attributes that we can adjust, and we're going to start by adjusting the position. So I'm going to probably move forward a few frames here. Let me actually just kind of zoom in some. I'm going to click it once, maybe click it twice. There you go. That's good. So I can see like every 5th frame adjusted. Not so much that I'm just overwhelmed with detail, but enough to where I have, a few seconds between the two sides of the little timeline here. So I'm going to advance my little timeline marker here, this little blue line. I'm going to click on that. I'm going to drag it over about 10 frames, which is about 1/3 of a second if you think about it that way. And I'm going to click on the stopwatches over here next to each one of these, except for position, except for anchor points. So I'm going to click on position, scale, rotation, and opacity. I'm going to create a keyframe for each one of those. Now, by clicking away, you can kind of see that that forms these little diamonds, these little square shapes here on this little marker. Now, the idea with keyframes is that if you were kind of used to working with these, you already know this, but if you are not familiar with this, the idea behind keyframes is that you give each attribute a specific sort of parameter, and then if you want to change it, you can go to a different area in the timeline, put a new keyframe in there, and it will sort of create an animation between the two keyframes. They call that tweening. Tweening is done by the computer here. Obviously, if we were working with paper, we would have to do every single one of those frames by hand. But this is obviously a big help when it comes to doing little animations here. Okay, so we'll just go say forward. Maybe 15 frames. We'll have each one of our little animations, each one of our keyframes, be about a 1/2 second apart. So I'm going to go forward. So if you think about this, if it's 30 frames a second, a 1/2 second is going to be about 15 frames. So we're here at 10 frames, right? I'm going to go forward about 15, so that's 5, 10, 15. So go over to 25 frames a second, and I'm going to go over here, and I'm going to click and add a keyframe next to position. And I got two ways of moving this thing. I can click on my little select tool, and I can just sort of drag it over this way. And as I drag it, I can hold down the shift key to make sure it goes in a completely straight line from one side to the other. Now, notice where I have this shall we say, little point right here. This is one keyframe. This is one little position marker. Compare that to the other one, and in relation to the side of your frame here, of your scene. So I want these to be about equidistant from the side of the frame. I don't want it to go all the way over here, and I don't want it to sort of end up in the middle. I want it to be about the about centered, rather, the 2 points where the center is going to be right about here, just so we have this looking a little even. I'm going to move forward another 15 frames here, so I'll just go 5. Well, first off, let's look at that. Let's see what this looks like. So I'm going to start off by pressing play here. All right, so there it goes. It goes forward about 5 frames, or for about 15 frames, or goes from left to right, rather, not necessarily forward. Okay, so I'll just once again go 5, 10, 15. So I am at the 1 second and then 10 frame mark here. Once again, I'll click on this little arrow, or this little arrow key up here, and I'll just drag this down. Now watch what happens as I drag this down. You'll notice it becomes very curved, because it's essentially kind of carrying along the velocity of the previous motion here. So it's almost as if it thinks, okay, well, I need to create a smooth arc between these two, so I'm gonna whip around like this. And let's see what this looks like as I do this. Let's watch this. All right, so it sort of goes around, and because I'm sort of traveling a shorter distance between this keyframe and this keyframe, we slow down a little bit, and that's fine. Okay, well, I don't necessarily want this to go along this little whip right here. I don't want that to happen, so I want to get rid of that little whip. And the way we do this is by clicking on the little keyframes along this path. So if we still have this path right here open, I can just click on one of these little keyframes right here, and I notice these little direction lines. Now, people who have been working with Illustrator know what the direction lines are. These little direction handles allow us to sort of affect the angle of a sort of path that's formed. Now, paths are very useful, very prevalent in Illustrator, not so much in Premiere. So I'm going to sort of draw this into the little corner right here. I'm going to pull this down into the other corner as well, both of these, and it's going to create a sharp angle for this little line here. It's going to go in a sort of straight line, so it's going to go boom, boom, right? So it's not even gonna stop. It's gonna come here, and then it's gonna keep going. And we'll keep doing that. I'm gonna go over here. Now, another way of affecting the motions, let's go forward 5, 10, 15 frames. And instead of dragging it, I'm gonna come down here to where it says position, and I'm gonna hover over these little values here. These little values are the X value of where it's positioned, and then the Y value of where it's positioned, right? So the sort of vertical and horizontal coordinates, as it were, on a Cartesian plane. Now, you see right here it says 15,000, or is it 1554? Once again, imagine this is a 1920 by 1080 frame, and 0 is over here, and 1920 is over here, and so that's what we're looking at right there. So I'm just gonna, instead of moving this across, I'm gonna click on this right here. Now, before I do anything, I can just sort of, once again, sort of drag this until I think it's about even with my previous keyframe here. I'm going to keep just click and drag until I get it right about there. All right, so I think that's about right. But if I wanted to be exact, I could just do this. I could just click back over here, and I could just examine this. This is, right now, I'm at the 291.9 mark. And over here, I just about got it 288. I'll just click on that once and then just press 291.9, I think. Let's double check. Yep, 291.9, good. Okay, so once again, I'm going to click on this little key point right here, this little keyframe here that's on my path, and I'm just going to drag these direction lines, these little handles, into the keyframe, so they don't, into this little anchor point here, just so they don't bend the frame anymore. And it looks about right. I think I could probably get a little further in here. Oops. But we'll call that. I'll probably call that good. All right. Okay, and so we'll do this one last time. Let's go forward 5, 10, 15 frames, and as once again, we'll just sort of drag our coordinates up here, and this time we're going to be working with the Y coordinates. I'm going to drag that up until it's right on top of the previous anchor point. In this case, I can just probably eyeball that, and that'll work out fine. Let's click on this little keyframe one more time, and we'll just drag this in. We'll drag this in as well. That way we can, okay, that way we can just sort of have it be just almost a straight line, maybe not necessarily exactly a straight line, but it'll be good enough for a wash. All right, so just 1, 2, 3, 4, good. All right, so four little movements there. Okay, so as we kind of do that, let's see if we can't do a scale. All right, so we start off with 100% scale, and you'll notice down here we've got this little chain, which is sort of constraining the proportions. That means if I were to sort of resize this by only adjusting the left or the width or height, it would adjust both. And so I'm going to be using this down here instead of this up here. Now, if I wanted to, say for instance, make this a bit bigger, I could, or smaller, I could just sort of hover over the kind of corner right here, and I can sort of drag it in. And as I drag it in, it gets a little bit smaller. In this case, I made it a little bit uneven, so you can always hold down Shift to constrain that, just kind of pull it in a little bit. Oops. Start dragging it. Oops. Start dragging it, and then hold down Shift, and it keeps it a square. Okay, so I don't necessarily want it to. I wanted to go at a really precise interval. I wanted to go down 20% each time it passes. So I wanted to start off with 100% size, and I want it to be about a fifth of the size once it gets back. So I'll just, instead of clicking anything, I'm just going to click on one of these, and I'm just going to press 80%, and it's going to shrink down by a degree of 1/5. And I'm going to go to each of my previous anchor points, and if you want to be really exact, you can hit the little arrows here on the side next to your little diamonds. This little blue diamond means that there's a key point currently there, and if you want to add one, you can just click there, you can add one, but it automatically adds one once you make any changes. So, all right, and I'll just do that again. I'll just go down 20%. I'll hit 60% on my my third keyframe here. I'll go over to the next keyframe. I'll click 40%, and to the next keyframe on my position, and I'll click 20% on my scale. So we can kind of watch this as it gets smaller and smaller. So it's constantly getting smaller and it's constantly moving. Okay, all right, so let's do that same thing. We'll do another round of rotations. So we'll just go through here, find our keyframes, and we're just going to rotate it 90 degrees each time. So watch this. I'll click forward for my first keyframe, and I'll just click on my little rotations. So we have the number of times it's rotated, like totally 360 degrees, and then the number of degrees in between. So at this point, I'm just going to keep this at 0, and I'm just going to press 90. And I'll go forward one, and instead of pressing 90, I'll press 180. And nothing changes over here because it's a square, so it's the same no matter if it's on one side or the other. And I'll go forward again, and this time I'll press 270. And then I'll go forward to my last keyframe, and I'll press 360. Okay. All right, so let's kind of watch what this happens here. So it's constantly spinning as it's constantly getting smaller as it's continuously moving. All right, that's good. And we'll just leave opacity alone up until right about here. And we'll put a little keyframe there. And I'll go forward, say, only 5 keyframes. And I'll put a little anchor point there. And I'll just go from 100% to 0. And let's do one last thing. Okay, so we have all these different effects applied, and I'm just going to real quick. If you click anywhere off of your objects and you press U on the keyboard, it's going to just display all the keyframes you have activated. So all the other attributes will disappear if you just press U on the keyboard, and you'll only see the keyframe that you want. Okay, or really the attributes here along the keyframe that you want. So all these little keyframes here, these are all the keyframes from our shape layer as we have it. And if I want to add an effect, if I want to add something, I have to actually purposely seek that out. So I'm going to go over here. I'm going to click on my shape layer, and I'm going to click on effect. Let me just go back here to the beginning, as it were. I'm going to click on effect. Once again, make sure you have your shape layer selected here. Effect, generate, and find where it says fill. And it's automatically going to change the color of your shape to red, the sort of fire engine red, which is, I want to say, like the kind of default color, as it were, for any Adobe program, this fire engine red. And I'm going to click on the little arrows until I see color, and this is where I'm going to choose a different color. So I actually went to coolers.com, and I picked out a little palette here. So I'm going to start off on one end and work my way over to the other. So I'll start off over here, and I'll just click on this, and I'll just copy this. If you want to go to Coolers and pick your own thing, if you want to do the one that I'm doing here, I'll just sort of show you the numbers that I'm using here. I'll get rid of that, and I'm going to click over here under my hex selector, and I'm just going to Control V, paste that hex code, the hexadecimal code in there. For those of us who aren't aware, hexadecimal is a basic HTML language that explains that sort of specifies one of, I don't know, a million different colors that you can use online when you're typing with HTML. All right, so that's that color there, and I'm just going to go ahead and activate keyframes right about here. And I'll once again press U on the keyboard. That way I can see the keyframes isolated. So I'm going to go forward to the first keyframe that we all have there. I'm going to hold down I'm going to click on this little add or remove keyframe right there. And I'll just go forward, and I'm going to add a new keyframe. And I'm going to click on my colors, and I'm going to choose the next color in my little palette there. If you want to choose a different one that you've got, that's fine. If you don't want, you can just click on Control V. You can just type this out, E8E288. That's the next little sort of lilac yellow color that I chose. Now the next one here, I'll make a new keyframe. I'll click on my little color swatch, bringing out my color picker, and I'll grab the next color here. If I can click on the right window, this little pastel green. This is 70B77E. Okay, and I'll go to the next keyframe, get a new keyframe under my color, and I will get the last color, which is this little pink color here. Copy that. That's D0B8AC, and I'll just paste that right there. And I like this little color that it has. It shows not only the color that it is going to land on, but it basically shows what color it's going to be in between. You can kind of sort of perceive what colors you're going to be seeing throughout by just looking down there. Now, the reason why I had this keyframe here is by virtue, I just wanted to make sure it stayed the same color. So it's going to go. Okay, so it's constantly changing colors, and it's constantly changing its opacity there. Okay, so let's add one more keyframe here at the beginning. I'm going to go down my opacity. I'm going to have it fade in a little bit. It's going to slowly fade in. I might actually even just have it fade in a little bit earlier. So one fun thing about the keyframes being arranged the way they are is you can actually move the keyframes after you've created them. So for instance, this keyframe here that's glowing blue, I can just sort of click and drag on that until it matches up right there. So it's sort of going to appear a little quicker. So, whoop. All right, good. Okay, so the last thing we'll do before we move on to the next little device is we're going to smooth this animation out a little bit. So I'm going to zoom out some to where I can see all of my keyframes all at once. And I'm just going to click down here on the timeline and just drag up to where I have all the keyframes glowing blue. All the keyframes that I made on this timeline should be glowing blue by clicking and dragging over them. So click and drag, select over all of these keyframes. And we're going to smooth out the way that they start and stop by going to Animation, Keyframe Assistant, and choosing this little option that says Easy Ease. So if you press F9 on the keyboard, you can achieve the same effect. And you'll notice they all turn into these little hourglass shapes. For those of us who've been working with Premiere, you'll probably notice this. You probably know this as the sort of temporal interpolation option that you have with keyframes. Oftentimes we'll use what's called Bezier keyframes. For those of us who have been working with Illustrator and Photoshop, you'll know that Bezier refers to little curves. The idea is that you would bend the sort of velocity of your animation along a Bezier curve. Now, watch the difference after we've added this little easy ease. Let me click off of this. Okay, so compare that to before. Let me just undo it. Compare this to before. All right, and then after. Try it again. You'll notice a big difference in the way it moves around. So instead of just continuously moving, it doesn't actually stop, but it slows down just enough to make it appear as if it's stopped. It's almost as if it's reached the apex of its if you threw a ball up in the air, there's a moment where it kind of reaches a point where it's completely emotionless almost. So that we're sort of its velocity drops down to 0. So that's kind of what's going on there. It's almost like it's staying still, not quite though. All right, so that's an easy way of, instead of having it just constantly move and not adding a bunch of keyframes to have it hold still for a few frames then move, we can just use that little keyframe assistant there. All right, so last thing we'll do before we add a background, we'll add two more things. We'll go over here to our text tool at the top, and I'm just going to click my little text tool there, and I'm just going to click and make sure that you're on around the keyframe where your little shape has disappeared, and just click somewhere in the center of your keyframe here. Now, it's going to bring up your character panel down there. If you don't see that, you can go to Window and make sure that character is selected, and you can choose the font down there. I've chosen I think 20th century MT condition, or TW-Sen MT condensed, and if you wanted to choose a different font, it's up to you, and just type your name in all caps, and and let's see if we can't make that pretty big. I have this 300 pixels in size, so if you just click on that and you just type in 300, it'll make it that big. And let's see if we can't align it to the center of our frame. And if you can't find the align tool, which I don't think it's available here. So for instance, if I were to sort of like, pull it away down this way. Oops, I have caps lock on for some reason. So whenever you have caps lock on, it tends to bug out a little bit. So make sure caps lock is not on. And let's go to Window, and let's go to Align. So your alignment comes up. It just says Align Layers to Composition, and just click on Align Horizontally and Align Vertically. Very handy tool that I wish we had in Adobe Premiere, but we don't. Okay, so I'm just going to have this appear by clicking on my the little name layer, the text layer here, and just clicking the letter T. The letter T brings up your opacity, which I guess that's T for opacity. I'm not really sure, but we'll just have that appear right about there. I'm just going to click my opacity there. I'm going to go forward about 5 frames and click on a new keyframe, and I'll just go back to this one right here, and I'll just click on my opacity and just click on the value 100% there and press 0. And so that'll fade in as we go through. So let's just watch how this goes. Okay, good. All right, so if you want to put the easy ease on those, once again, we'll just go over here, click those 2 layers, click on Animation, and Keyframe Assistant, and just press Easy Ease, and that will just sort of ease this in, so it sort of appears a little bit differently. Now, obviously, it's kind of hard to tell if it's just 5 seconds, which is like 5 frames, which is like a sixth of a second. And there we have it. So we have this 10-second long video, but we'll only have about sort of like 2.5 seconds of things actually happening. So let me just zoom out all the way so I can see all 10 seconds. Oops, zoom out all the way. And I'm just going to shrink this down to about 3 seconds in length. So once I get to about 3 seconds, so the way we do this is by going over here to these little blue tabs, and this little arrow hovers over the work area end. I'm just going to drag that in until it's right about there. And that way we can have this constrained to about 3 seconds, because we only have about 2 seconds worth of footage that we're actually want to do. Okay, so if you want to add a background layer, otherwise, so I have this little gray background. That's just the workspace. The actual background right now is blank, ergo it's black. So if you want a new background, then what you'll want to do is you'll want to create a new solid. So if I go down here to my little layers over here, I'm just going to press U on the keyboard to get everything gone, and just right click anywhere in this little gray black area down here and just press New, press Solid, and you can create a new solid that will cover the entire screen here. And if you click on Make Comp Size, it'll be the same size as your frame, and you can choose any color you want. I'm going to once again choose that little 333333 color. If you want to choose a different color, you're welcome to. Make sure that it's a different color than the ones that than your rectangle. Make sure that it kind of fits in well. Just keep in mind color, and press OK. And I'm just going to drag this down to the bottom of our layer stack, making sure that everything else appears above it. So that's good. Okay, good. All right, so the last thing we'll do is export this as a video, and I will have a different video explaining how we change the video into a GIF using Photoshop. So let's go ahead and go to File, Export, and right here you should say Add to Adobe Media Encoder Queue, and then Add to Render Queue. So I'm going to go ahead and click on Add to Render Queue. And I believe it's going to... never mind. I'm just going to go back, and I'm just going to say File, Export, Add to Adobe Media Encoder. Now, if you don't already have Adobe Media Encoder open, it's going to take a second for Adobe Media Encoder to open. And as it does, you'll see... Let's get rid of this. Something like this. You'll see these letters, H264, which is the sort of encoding sort of code for the format encoder for the MP4, which is a pretty basic piece of a pretty basic video file. And you'll see this right here where it says match source medium bitrate, which if you were to depending on the way you wanted to export this is a 5-second clip, so you can just do match source high bit rate, and it shouldn't be too terribly big. And over here you'll see the place where it's going to be saved to. So if I click on this little output file, I'm going to click on my click on that. I'm going to click on my videos, and let's go ahead and make a new folder. Let's make a new folder and call it Premiere, After Effects Animations. And we'll just click on that, and it should have it saved as Adobe After Effects Intro, and press save. Make sure that you have, your name, not my name, at the very end there. Just make sure you have that. I hope that was clear. All right, so once that's all settled and you know where it's going to be saved, go ahead and press the play button, and it's going to render this out as a animation in a video format, and you can click on the name of it there, and you can just double click on that and you can see what it looks like after it's all done. So 1, 2, 3, 4, very pretty. Okay, so a lot of this stuff, I think, apart from the color change in Premiere and the sort of easy, and like the easing in, I mean, most of that can be done. This can be done in different programs. So you can do most of this stuff in Premiere. You can do most of this stuff, well, basically everything that you see here. You can do it in Photoshop as well. It's a lot more labor intensive in Photoshop, and you're missing a few things that you need for Adobe Premiere. It's going to take a few more steps. It's not all kind of at your fingertips. So Adobe After Effects has a lot of really cool tools that sort of streamlines the animation process. It's just a matter of getting used to the workspace and getting used to the controls. It's not a very intuitive program. It's not one of those things you kind of click around on and figure out. But make sure you can locate this, and you'll be turning it in not as a video, but as an animated GIF, and I'll explain how we do that in the next video.